Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Strategy and Policy 16th of July committee meeting. And most importantly, after 7 years, I want to welcome our online viewers for the first time in 7 years. This is the first Strategy and Policy Committee meeting, and I promise to my colleagues I won't carry on about web broadcasting of meetings any longer.
We did wonder why you had your hair done today.
This is the pinnacle, this one.
The
So welcome
to
to our online viewers. Welcome, Your Worship, councillors, members of the public and media. I also want to welcome our new committee secretary, Wendy Vescarin. I think I pronounced that right. Welcome aboard, Wendy. Now, we do have one apology, I think, from Councillor Green. Are there any other apologies? No?
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson's moved, seconded by Councillor Mallett. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Now, confirmation of the agenda. You should have in front of you the run sheet. If you all agree, I'd like to move item 9, bring it up straight after item 7 to accompany our guests from the fire service. So thank you, Councillor Mallett's moved that, seconded by Councillor Tooman. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Any declarations of interest? No. And I've no public forum today? No? Great. Right, we move on to the first item then. Item number 5, Chair's report on page 5. Now, I have made an error there. In the first item there on annual plan, the street and directional signage policy review is actually November 2014, not October 2014. My mistake. Are there any questions on the report? A couple of updates there for you. There being no questions, I'll move my report be received.
I'll second.
Councillor Mallett got in just before you, Councillor Wilson.
Fine.
Any discussion? All those in favour? Against?
Chair, sorry, just going back
Sorry.
to apologies, I just wanted to make sure I didn't hear. Did you put Councillor Forsyth back on attendance? Because the apologies report her as absent.
We did record her as absent, so... Oh, yes, I'm assuming
and
it would have
also,
been...
so the apology is for Councillor.
Yeah, we did do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, moving on to page 7, Strategy and Policy Open Minutes of the 4th of June meeting. Any questions or comments on the minutes? I'm happy to move that they are a true and accurate record, seconded by Councillor Young. Thank you. Any discussion? No? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Right, item number 7, the action list and submission schedule for strategy and policy on page 13. I have just a couple of updates on that. Now, just on the first one there, committee members, 19th of February, I just wanted to update you on the earthquake submission that I presented with Phil Saunders, our building manager, on the 19th of June to the Select Committee chaired by Maggie Barry. It was a very quick submission. I spoke to the brief points of the submission and there were no questions. She commented that our submission was very clear and that was really all there was. Just down there on 28th of November, as we know, the General Manager of Events and Economic Development is unwell, so we will push that, change the date for that event strategy to come to us on the 3rd of September. So that change can be recorded. And also down on 5th of February, just under the Stormwater Bylaw Determination report on that list, that to the right of that underneath it talks about the Hamilton Arts Forum action. that needs to also be updated to reflect the resolution from the council meeting of the 26th of June. So if that can be also captured in the minutes. Does Councillor Mallett?
Just the stormwater one, should we report, that's been done, that was what we had yesterday, hasn't it?
Yes, that will be noted as completed the next time you see this. And those other two the Chair has raised, I have got those for the update as well.
Councillor McPherson?
The number 10, there's two item 10s, the second number 10, remote library strategic plan and review process. Remind me of, that's a bit truncated, that description of the process here. Sorry, is there proposed to be a workshop prior to it coming back here where the report can be presented? Or is it coming directly here? And what's the consultation process involved?
Thank you. We'll go to the GM, Lance. Can you answer that?
I haven't got a project plan in front of me, but my recollection is that it will come back to a workshop for councillors to be able to give some feedback, discuss it as you normally do at a workshop, and then there will be an opportunity for the public to actually have some say on that. They have already been invited to put in some feedback through the working group. I think to date there's been, and Councillor King might help me here, I think about 1,000 to 1,200 pieces of feedback, and the staff have been grouping that up for the working group to have a look at that when they have their next meeting in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. So there will be ample opportunity for council to have a look at a draft of the strategic plan to give their feedback before anything's finalised.
Could the date of the workshop presentation or whatever it is, discussion, be worked out and incorporated into that?
Yes, so we'll have a look at a calendar of workshops and that sort of thing to see where we can fit it in and make sure we've got ample time for that.
Thanks.
And I think, Lance, it's coming back to the October meeting as opposed to the September meeting, I think, as well.
Yes, just at the working group, the working group's actually asked for more information on various aspects. We've had staff and outside people actually start to gather information, so it's taken a little bit longer than we expected, but we feel that's prudent to do that to make sure that we're taking all this information into account when we form up a draft for council to consider. So we'll have a look at those timeframes and make sure that councils are clear on the timeframe of the workshop, and we'll be report back to council.
And Councillor McPherson will capture that and make sure that's on the action list, those key dates. Anything else on the action list? And just behind those are the outstanding submissions. Changes are in yellow, I understand. Yep. There's 4 new ones on there, isn't there?
There is?
There is, yeah. On page, you'll see 3 new ones tucked onto the back of that. Any questions or comments? There being none, I will move the action and submission list be accepted, seconded by Councillor Gallagher. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Right, now let's move to item number 9, and I'd like to invite Peter Hallett and Rob Karaitiana up to the table. Welcome, gentlemen. Just for questions, can you come up here? Yes? Yep. Great. So, Your Worship and Councillors, Peter Hallett is the Risk Management Officer for the Fire Service, and Rob is the Assistant Area Manager standing in for Roy Breeze. Is that right? Great, so welcome. And they are here for questions. So who's speaking on this item, Glenn?
I think we'll just let the staff, so we'll let staff to speak briefly first.
Yeah.
So Liz, maybe Liz just can give a quick...
you can take the report as read, but just highlight why the report's in front of us today.
You will have received, councillors, through the chair, you will have received the report and prefacing that a memo. Prefacing that memo that explained the background to this item. In August 2013, Council got a request from the fire service asking us to look at putting a bylaw in place so that we could enable better management of and nuisance fires, and this report is due to that request. In previous years, up until 2007, we did have a bylaw in place that enabled us to manage that. In 2007, that bylaw was revoked because it was believed at the time that other legislation would help us manage the issue of vegetation fires. Since that point, the fire service and staff have agreed that it's not being managed adequately, and that's why we've come to you with the determination report regarding an open air burning bylaw.
Great, thank you. So we'll open up to questions, councillors, of either staff or the fire service.
Madam Chair, just a quick question, actually just one of a definition of a fire as distinct from, say, a barbecue, and how we manage that.
That would be managed within the definitions of the bylaw when we write the bylaw. You can, when you write a bylaw, you can include or exclude anything you wish to by the way you write the definitions. Generally, in the model bylaw, they will include a fire as a barbecue as a fire, but then if they want to exclude it for any particular reason, it will then be excluded within the clauses. Say, if there is a fire ban, it excludes removes, hungies, barbecues specifically, and that would then be defined in the definitions of the bylaw.
A subsequent question, Madam Chair. I guess I need to get a better understanding of that before I would support a bylaw, because I guess in theory, or are you simply saying that if we approve this, you'll come back to us with the bylaw, and if we don't like parts of it, then we can work to remove it?
So, through the Madam Chair, the way it works is we present a report saying, is a bylaw appropriate? At that stage, staff would go away with key stakeholders, and councillors can be part of that key stakeholder group if they wish to set up a focus group or a working group to work on it, to define what's actually in the bylaw, what the clauses say, what the definitions are, and then we would come back with what's called the statement of proposal report, which would include a draft bylaw. And at that stage, the whole committee can look through the bylaw and discuss those clauses, the definitions, whether they feel it suits the city or not before it goes out to consultation or goes any further.
And thank you.
Councillor McPherson?
Yeah, Liz, just before in your opening comments, you stated that it had been thought when the previous bylaw was revoked, that the other legislation would handle any situation that might arise. But in number 13, you actually say something slightly different, the way I read it anyway, that at the time the risks, you're talking about dry weather and things like that, you thought it could be managed under the Local Government Act.
Yeah.
And that the reasons that you are now bringing it back is because of the extended dry weather we've had the last 2 summers, which is not quite the same as saying that the legislation couldn't handle it.
So the legislation could handle the situation at the time as it was perceived. Since that time, we've seen a lot more dry summers come about, and we've seen in the summer of 2012, 2013, the fire service came to us and requested our support in seeing if we could put a fire ban in place, because the fire weather index was saying we were at extreme risk in that situation of fires taking hold and risking life and property and not being able to be easily controlled. At that point, we found out there wasn't any way we could put a fire ban in place. So although we have the Local Government Act under section 183 that enables us to manage vegetation growth, that doesn't help us in a situation like we had in 2012, 2013, where the summer's so dry that it's not just the odd sections that's the problem, it's the city as a whole.
So the information or the advice given to us in 2007 by staff and the fire service was wrong, basically. You're saying, because we had a bylaw, which would have been very easy to roll over, update without a whole lot of extra work, now we've got to start fresh.
Yes.
So in 2007 we were given the wrong information. They took a risk that didn't pay off.
Simple answer is yes. Simple answer is it should not have been revoked in 2007.
And it would have taken a lot less work just to roll over the old bylaw than it does now to stop and start again. Because we're doing this like a brand new one.
We would still have to have reviewed the bylaw by now, between 2007 and now. So we would have still had to have gone through the process.
But as explained to us yesterday about bylaws, if it's just essentially a rollover, then there's no, for instance, public.
So you still have to go through that whole process, but the reports, you know, it's not the same length of reports and things that go into that. However, we still have to, if we do a review of a bylaw, it's the same as making a bylaw, and we still have to go through a full public consultation.
I'm sorry, I must have been listening to a different meeting yesterday then.
I think the simple message is that what was thought in 2007 that could be as an alternative to mitigate the issue in terms of potentially fire risk, it's proven not to be the case. And so the mechanisms available to council aren't as extensive as was thought in 2007. And I guess this report is saying, in light of that decision making was wrong.
I suppose the last question I had, which was something I found difficult to believe, to be honest, at the second bullet point in number 19, it says that for fire service or the council couldn't extinguish a nuisance fire that you thought needed to be put out, couldn't legally do so, which I find flabbergasting. What would happen to the fire service if they turned the fire hose on and put it out anyway? I mean, how's that going to, surely there would be no action taken.
Councillor, we have been challenged on numerous occasions by members of the public who we have gone to those types of fires and said, listen, we're here to do it. They want to see the mandate that we operate under show us the bylaw, or, you know, there's potentially some people with legal backgrounds who have challenged us that we have no legal right to go and extinguish a nuisance fire. The fire service only has rights to extinguish fires if they're creating a risk to life or property, and in such a case, like somebody burning, say, rubber off copper wires in their backyard, doesn't fall in within the fire service act. That's how we can act, and essentially our hands are tied and we have to walk away. We've had a number of occasions where we have been able to further our actions with the assistance of the New Zealand Police, because that's how serious some things have got from time to time. But that's all time consuming. It's a pretty ugly situation to deal with when you're on the ground. And so, you know, this is partly why, and if I can just say back to the point earlier about we got it wrong, I concede I think the fire service at the time, whoever it was, nobody's put their hand up for it, has got it wrong back in 2007 as well. There's some notes you may see that the fire service report said that, or the officer was reported as saying that the chief fire officer could impose a fire ban. The chief fire officer has no ability to impose a fire ban whatsoever. So here we come back to this sort of thing.
Thanks for that.
Councillor Pascoe?
Yes, my question has been partly answered under I'm just trying to get my head around what a nuisance fire is, because and it may well be that our bylaw, if a bylaw is an outcome of this discussion, needs to be quite clear. But if my reading is right, a nuisance fire might well be what the fire service might regard as a safe fire, in the sense that it may be, I don't know, I guess burning green matter in an incinerator, where it may not necessarily spread and create a fire risk, but it might be a nuisance in the sense that the neighbours might find the smoke and the smell and so forth to be unpleasant and unacceptable. So are we looking for cover under both being able, you having some sort of mandate to deal with a fire that might be dangerous, and secondly a fire that might not necessarily be dangerous but might be deemed to be a nuisance?
Yes, Councillor, the fire service obviously has got, through the Fire Service Act, the ability to deal with dangerous fires or fires that present a danger per se to public or property. So we're not looking for this forum to try and address that in any way, shape or form. We can take care of that. The nuisance fires potentially could come around, as you say, with people burning garden waste in their backyard, burning rubber tyres, burning plastic, whatever. And the Regional Council, Environment Waikato, have got a reasonably prescriptive handout, if you like, about materials that you can burn legally, like garden waste and cardboard and bits and pieces. You can burn that, but you're not allowed to burn tyres, plastic, bitumen, that type of thing, old fridges, etc., etc. You're not allowed to burn those. But I think it's covered quite, the catch-all for all of that is that your activity must not affect people, plants or animals outside of your property boundary. So that means that you must not cause odour problems, health or safety risks or damage to other people's property. You must manage discharges that will carry in the air, such as smell, smoke, dust or light material. So if it was offensive for a long time, that you were home, you had your washing out and bits and pieces, that would be the type of fire that we're seeking a bylaw to address, that we would go to and say, first up, because we have to go when we're called, we have no choice, we have to go to the property where we're called to. We would go there and we would talk to the occupier and owner, say, listen, you know that you're in breach of bylaw XYZ at the moment, and could you please put that out or consider it? And they can get a little bit obnoxious if they choose to, but then we have the ability to act further.
Thank you.
Councillor Gallagher?
I'll save it for discussion. I think Trish
Yeah.
has
Okay. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, look, mine was a quick question back to the fire officers and their expertise. And I know it appears I'm singly focused around barbecues, but I do have a passion for having the right to have a barbecue in my own property, including at the peak of summer. From your expertise and experience, are there often fires that start from these contained barbecues, as distinct from somebody sort of digging a hole and putting some sticks and sort of barbecuing their sausages?
Councillor, normally gas-fired barbecues are often never included in any fire ban.
Good.
Gas-fired ones. The kiln ones that emit ashes and embers are different, and they are only controlled by the restriction that you, the council, put on, be it a restricted or prohibited season.
Great. Thank you.
Councillor Forsyth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just want to understand, if we were to say yes to a bylaw, how would that be different to, let's say, the Waikato Regional Council bylaw? Because I'm thinking there might be a double up in bylaws, and if Waikato Regional Council already has something that is working, why would we need one for the city as well?
Waikato Regional Council don't have a bylaw. They don't have the ability to put a bylaw in place to manage fires. What they do have is the regional plan, and the regional plan is what was being referred to. The regional plan sets out what people can and can't do with burning. However, and it does cover nuisance fires. They cannot put out a fire. So what we've established is that our staff, regional council staff, nor the fire service at this current time can put out a nuisance fire within the city boundaries. So none of us can do that. They can send an abatement notice, but that takes 3 or 4 days to come through. So that you've breached the regional plan, and you therefore may not do what you've done again. So whatever it is they've established, they've been burning. They can also take them to the point of prosecution. However, what we've been looking at being the issue is that at no stage can anybody actually intervene in that nuisance fire whilst it's happening. The other thing that they cannot do is they cannot declare a fire ban in a drought or in an extremely dry summer. So without a bylaw in an urban area in New Zealand, nobody is able to declare a fire ban. The only ability we have is through a bylaw to do that.
So this is a question to the firemen. So the fire bans that I see when I'm travelling around the country are bylaws that have been
Yes, essentially, yes. The fire bans that you might see when you're driving around the country, I suspect, are Burnie near a forest, are they?
Yes.
So they're imposed by different legislation, the Forest and Rural Fires Act, and through a whole different process that deals with fires in rural type environments. What we're trying to deal with here is a fire ban in an urban environment, and I know that it ought not to be a reason why it should be considered as necessary for Hamilton. But if you were to have a look, and I just in my very limited knowledge of how things work, jumped onto Google and had a look at fire bans throughout New Zealand, and then by far the majority of city councils have urban fire bans, or ways of dealing with urban fire issues. So that's essentially, we've pulled a lot of their New Zealand standards, have a model bylaw for dealing with open fires, burning fires, which most of the other TA's regulations are modelled around in some way, shape or form. You can adopt it, you can adapt it, and do different things with it. So 2 different pieces of legislation, urban and rural.
Okay, so if, how many other urban TLAs then have fire bans? You just talked about some of them. Where does Hamilton fit?
So out of the 67 territorial authorities, 52 have fire bans, and the vast majority, we couldn't find a single urban authority that didn't have a bylaw in place to enable fire ban.
Every city in New Zealand has
as far as we can find, we can't find another city that doesn't have a bylaw that enables them to have fire ban. We are the only one that we're aware of.
Okay, and one more question, thank you. So if we've sort of talked, there's some reference to Hangi here, and so how are you going to deal with that? I mean, we have Hangi a couple of times a year, so could I not do that now?
No, Councillor, no, you certainly can, and as Rob was saying earlier on, some of it's going to be dependent on the wording. I think that if this was to proceed further, the fire service would look to do it, in collaboration and partnership with the council to make sure that we got it right. But there's wording such as this, and this has come out of the model bylaws, and if I could use this, for example, and this is one territorial authority wording that I actually grabbed, and it says barbecues, braziers and traditional cooking fires may be used in part of that district, provided that there is no immediate danger or likelihood to danger of person or property, that there is appropriate means of extinguishment is immediately available, that there is supervision maintained at all times, and that there's no nuisance caused. Now, I've been to many, and my colleagues have been to many traditional cooking fires over the years, and to the best of my knowledge, we have never attempted to extinguish one because we understand what that's about. It would be foolhardy. We're not looking to be the fun police, if you like, in that respect. It's and to try and clobber people over the head because that creates aggression from them to us, which we don't need, and it's not the type of thing that we're trying to achieve by doing this.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor King.
So if we were having a umu or a hangi, traditionally to heat the stones you have a bonfire. So you're allowed to have a bonfire to heat the stones for your hangi, but you're not allowed to have a bonfire. Are we allowed to have a bonfire with 6-pack sausages where we're cooking our sausages with a stick over the fire? Where do you draw the line? So you turn up at somebody's 21st birthday, they've got a bonfire, the kids are cooking marshmallows on the bonfire, cooking sausages on sticks over the bonfire. Does that qualify to be okay? And does the bonfire to get the hangi stones hot qualify as okay?
I understand the question that you're asking, and it's a difficult one to give a definitive answer to, I believe, Councillor, but it would depend on if this bylaw was to proceed, how it was written, and if there were any restrictions in place. If there was a total fire ban in place, for example, because everybody agreed that it was entirely appropriate and necessary to have one, I would suggest that a bonfire that wasn't related to potentially cooking a hangi, because I think, from my experience, a large bonfire for no really reason apart from standing around it and having fun, cooking a hangi fire over here, which is a lot more controlled and normally smaller, and there's always people attending it. I think those are there's some subtle differences in the two fires. So I would say that in a totally restricted season, it's been put in place for a good reason. Everybody's agreed to that reason. You wouldn't get away with a large bonfire to cook the kids' sausages.
So we've just had 2 very dry summers. Have we had any? It's a pretty good test to see whether we need a fire ban or not during these. One of them's been a drought. The other one had a lower rainfall than the one before, but it wasn't declared a drought. because Hamilton didn't get as much rain as other areas. That's a pretty good test to see whether we need a fire ban or not. Were there any out of control fires that started that you're aware of?
What sort of, I missed the word before test, sorry, what sort of test?
Well, we've had 2 of the driest summers on record. Did we have any incidents? Because that's a pretty good test, 2 summers in a row, as to whether we need a fire ban or not.
If I could give a 2-part answer to that, is that in summer, fire calls to the type of fires that we're generally dealing with increase and from some of the information that you've been provided, you'll see spikes during the summer months for vegetation, miscellaneous type fires, that type of thing, and they'll decrease off into the winter. And yes, we have had fires, and albeit one this year, strangely enough, that did spread from a small rubbish fire that maybe took out 3 or 4 sort of acres, a shed, a construction shed on a neighbouring property that was caused by a spark that came from a small fire next door.
In the Hamilton city boundary?
In Hamilton, out Riverlea Road.
4 acres?
Oh, down the back there, we forget the name of the actual drop-off down. There's a big old boat that's been sitting down there for half 100 years getting built, but it's down there, and the fire spread through. We had most probably all of the city's resources there. We did have all of the resources there, and we had hoses, fire hoses running off every truck that was available, and all manpower utilised, because this fire had spread from a little fire in an incinerator to the neighbouring property, which demolished their shed and further on.
So are the cause of fires recorded?
Generally they are, Councillor, yes, and it's totally reliant on them being, I suppose, recorded correctly. There's no simple way of getting around that, is that if the fire officer comes home at the end of the day and just doesn't tick necessarily the right box, then our stats won't reflect what that may or may not have been.
So this question I asked as to other causes, I asked the question in writing, there will be a higher number of vegetation fires in the summer as things are much more combustible as they're dry. The question is, how do they start? Is it recorded? And the answer I got back is the cause of fires are not recorded.
Sorry? I'm not aware of who provided that answer, Councillor, but they...
So you do record how fires start?
Councillor King, if I can just help here with some of that information was emailed out to us on the 12th of July, and my understanding from the fire service was that they record the cause of fires, but there was quite a long period where there was some industrial action where some causes of fires weren't recorded.
Okay, that's not qualified here. Okay, so where I'm heading here is, where's the evidence that we need a fire ban? Where's the actual evidence? Where are the incidents that have happened over the last 2 summers? I mean, when I directly asked the question, which I understood came from the New Zealand Fire Service, they said the cause of fires are not recorded.
Yeah, Councillor King, I think we need to just direct the question to the fire service that they can actually answer, and all of that information, particularly based on the answer I just helped you with, was in that email from the 12th of July. I haven't any extra information.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I do. It's proposed, this is for staff, it's proposed that night fires could also be out. And that's not just during the time of the fire ban, that's all year round, which is in the standard document that the New Zealand Fire Service talked about. Is that correct?
So, through you, Madam Chair, what we do in the determination report is we record all the issues that have been raised by key stakeholders, and one of the issues that was raised by key stakeholders, as was reported in the memo from the Fire Service, is the issue of nighttime burning. Now, just because an issue is raised by a key stakeholder doesn't mean that it's going to end up in the bylaw. It means that at the stage after we've determined whether we're having a bylaw or not, the key stakeholders, council, staff, and if councillors wish to be part of that working group, sit down and discuss what items are appropriate for our city and what items are not appropriate for our city, and it's come to jointly. So yes, in a determination report, we record everything that any key stakeholder has brought to us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the outcome of the final bylaw.
I think also, if I can also be of assistance, Councillor King, I have picked up that this is, and I'm going to say it, a hot topic around the table. So in my motion,
It's a burning issue.
it's even better. In my motion, I am going to suggest that, and I've checked with the GM, he's happy with this, that that council resolve that the statement of proposal, if it goes forward, come to a council briefing ahead of the S&P meeting, and then that way we'll be able to influence also at a particular stage the statement of proposal.
Can I ask more questions?
Sure.
So it says in one of the reports that we received that there's around about $800 per call out to get a fire engine to come out, and that's $40,000 plus a year that it costs New Zealand Fire Service. Aren't your overheads fixed, whether you're all sitting at the station, all the machinery's there, the building's there, your power's running, your overhead structure I imagine would be quite linear, whether you get a call or not, and this report's implying that this is a $40,000 saving. Should we put a fire ban in place? I just don't quite follow the logic of that comment. I think this comment came through you, through staff, so I don't quite know who would answer that. But
Councillor, I do believe that that was one aspect of the whole response. You know, the fire service, if I can speak on their behalf, is not focused on $48,000 or trying to recoup $48,000. The primary focus for us here was trying to demonstrate that that's the type of calls that we have. That we do have a charge-out rate. If we were to charge on, for most fires we don't. They're covered by your insurance levies and so forth. But the thing that we were trying to demonstrate there is the sheer volume of calls that we respond to, whether or not we charge for them or otherwise. It becomes sort of semi-irrelevant. We might get to a position somewhere that we might try and charge for ongoing repeat offenders if there was something like that in place, but to try and discourage them from doing such thing, but that hasn't been discussed at all. I think what we're trying to say is, like, we're going to 240 odd of these a year. They're consuming a lot of our time. Much of the time we're going back to them multiple times, and some of that is night time, because fires are visible from all over the city, particularly if you live up high at night. So people will ring up from Newcastle Road and say, I can see a fire, and it happens to be down in, I don't know, Beresford somewhere. So you end up chasing your tail and you can't find it, so you get back to the station, and then somebody will ring up from Beresford and say, I can smell smoke. So you end up driving all around Beresford, you never find it, and then the third time you'll drive to Beresford because somebody's rung in the actual address. So it's time consuming, and that's what we're trying. You know, we've got a lot of medical responses now that we're trying to support other parts of the emergency services with, and it's time that we don't want or need to spend dealing with nuisance type rubbish fires if we can educate, and then ultimately if we have to do something about it a little bit more legislatively.
This question's for staff. A nuisance fire is the smoke, could be the smoke, ash that annoys neighbours. What about a wood burning fire inside your house, the smoke coming out of that was annoying your neighbour? Is this going to be the next step that's going to be included in the fire ban?
This is an open air burning bylaw, so it only covers fires outside. It doesn't cover internal fires, so it's not, it doesn't cover...
The answer's no.
Yeah.
Okay, and you said that Hamilton City Council will have no right to extinguish fires, but it also says in the report that you put out that if a fire can be proven to be causing an effect on a person's health through smoke, odour or ash or any other means, Hamilton City Council can, under the Health Act 1956, require the fire to be extinguished or extinguish it themselves. Now, you directly said earlier that you weren't able to put fires out.
I said we weren't. I said nobody was able to put out nuisance fires, not fires that directly affect people's health. So health is covered under the Health Act, and Peter McGregor can talk to that if you need further information. But in terms of nuisance fires that are not affecting people's health but are causing a nuisance to neighbours, then nobody, not ourselves, the regional council, nor the fire service are able to extinguish those fires.
So can Waikato Regional Council and Hamilton City Council issue somebody with an abatement notice for having a fire, which would obviously be like a warning or a small fine? How does that work?
So the Waikato Regional Council can issue an abatement notice. We cannot issue an abatement notice for nuisance fires at the moment. The formal warning would come as in terms of a letter, so it's sent out. The same with an abatement notice. It's a written device, so therefore they go to the site, explore what's happening on the site, record what the cause is, what's happening in terms of how it's breaching the regional plan. Then they go back to the office, then they issue an abatement notice. So it's not an instant effect. It doesn't have a real-time effect on the fire at the time in terms of the effects of the fire. It will have an effect in terms of how that person responds going forward.
So is that like a speeding ticket in your car? You get a fine?
So I'm just reading stuff from the Waikato Regional Council, as I don't see them myself. So they don't get a fine necessarily. Hang on. It's to desist that activity.
And if they don't?
It's then an offence.
Peter, can you answer
Yeah, I
that?
mean, it's your area of expertise. Why don't you answer?
The issue where an abatement notice is an issue. And abatement notice is not usually issued unless it's a problem plus, because there's an ongoing issue with either noise emission in one case and burning fires in another case. My view of the bylaw is about enabling the fire service and council to deal with the related incidences of fires. It's the first time the ability to deal with it at the time. Abatement notice is not meant to include.
Right, thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Mallat?
Thank you. Just to be clear, this is not talking about fires that are risking life or property. You can do that anyway. You don't need any authority. You've got the authority to do that come hell or high water.
Section 28 Fire Service Act.
Okay. So we're talking about, so in the situation since 2007 when the bylaw was repealed, just generally you have had situations where you've gone to a nuisance fire, which is not a risk of life or property, but is a little bit annoying. Too much smoke, or I guess the smoke would be undefined smell, fumes, I guess. And you've had scenarios where you've said to the chair, look, mate, I know this is not risking anyone's life and no one's house is going to burn down, but your neighbours are getting totally hosed off about the smell or the smoke or something else. Can you tone it down? Can you turn it out, turn it off? Because we're not talking about life and property here, are we?
No.
No, so it's not a,
Yeah. And that is the case, and you know,
That's right, and that's happened?
8 times out of 10, I think, you know, a reasonable approach by the operational firefighters and crews will encourage somebody to put it out. You have those ones that I mentioned a little bit earlier on that won't let you, will challenge and various things. So if I was to give you an example that I used, a very quick example, I got called to a mongrel mob house to put out a hangi fire. It was never happening.
So it was,
it was never going to happen because it was a hangi fire, and it didn't really matter who it was who had the hangi fire. But it was a process, and after we had a discussion for an hour and a half, 3 police cars, 2 fire engines, and half of the residents of the house, the fire had subsided enough for it not to be a problem in any event.
So in that situation, there was never a risk that someone's going to get killed, burnt, or a house was going to get burnt down, but there were neighbours who were annoyed by the smell and smoke, etc. Okay, so it's not tragedies we're talking about here, eh? It's a nuisance, which is still a valid thing to be concerned with. And this is a question, I guess, for Liz Moore. There are 2 things I think that a bylaw would do. One is preventing it happening at all, saying the conditions are such that you cannot have fire ban because it's just too dry and it's too risky. And the other situation is I want the warrant, the ability to go to people who are doing a fire that's not going to cause a death or destruction, but I want a bit of paper that says, so I don't have to argue. So I can say, here's me a bit of paper, mate, put it out. And if they say no, at that stage you can bring out the hose, can you? And currently you can't bring out the hose until they, without their permission.
That's exactly the issue.
Okay. So there's two issues.
Yeah.
So the word fire ban has been used. Is that, we're talking about, so the bylaw would cover two things though. Because the fire ban is more a situation about danger, and surely you don't need a bylaw for that.
At the moment, the way legislation is written nationally, there's national legislation to deal with fires in rural areas and forest areas. We're not a rural fire area, we're an urban fire area, and therefore we don't get covered by national legislation. In that situation, and we discovered this in 2012, 2013, there is no ability within the fire service or within council or anywhere else to put a fire ban in place. It relies on, and the legislation is written in such a way that it relies on council putting a bylaw in place to give us that power, and currently we don't have that.
So the bylaw, the suggested bylaw, which I appreciate will go through a whole lot of process and we'll see it 100 times and get it explained to us. So your goal would be to be able to put in a blanket fire ban, which presumably would stop the nuisance fires and the death and property fires. But secondly, you want this bit of paper that says, mate, I'm allowed to say to you, put out your fire or else I'm going to hose it down. Okay.
I think, Councillor, it's important to note too that it's not automated as you might think. It's not, say, the 1st of December every year to the 31st of March, boom, there's a fire ban. You're right, there's two parts. We could go years without the fire service recommending to the council that you need a fire ban.
Appreciate that. You'll do it based on the conditions at the time.
Yeah, and so it is. There's a number of things. The fire ban, whether it's restricted, totally prohibited, or open, and then there is the dealing with the nuisance fires. Sort of sitting just off to the side of that a little bit.
Okay.
Councillor Forsyth?
Yeah, that's the line of questioning I wanted to follow up on. Just the last comments you made there. So the fire ban that you're seeking is a seasonal one, and you're going to make that call depending on the conditions. Yep. But the other one we just talked about, the nuisance fires, you want that all year round. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. That's if we went back to those Environment Waikato Regional Council, that guideline that once upon a time used to be a Hamilton City Council guideline. They have a pamphlet here which is very similar based on what that used to be about what you can, can't burn, and if you annoy somebody to the extent, it's not at all again to go and clobber somebody immediately straight up. It's we have to go. We'd go down on our big fire engine, we'd pull up, say, listen guys, this is creating a bit of a nuisance. Can you, we'll ask them in the first instance if they put it out themselves, etc., explain to them. And if they got, if we were met some resistance, then we have the ability to deal with it. It's all year round. That, it's a nuisance fire in the middle of winter, nuisance fire in the middle of summer. It's somebody burning rubber, off the copper wire in the backyard is going to annoy anybody at the best of times. And when they do that, we can't do anything about it.
If I may, from my personal experience, Councillor, Madam Chair, we don't normally, foresters do not normally go along and extinguish it straight away. We normally appeal to their good sense, ask them to put no more material onto the fire and let it die down. Don't normally go on the hose and then put it out. Don't, and if we will get them to put it out, we normally will first.
Yeah, it's all about that application and common sense and balance. And I suppose, from my point of view, I think it's important that we don't want to destroy everyone's ability and opportunity to have some fun or to do what they want to do in their own backyard, but you want to be able to keep a lid on things as well. If I can just shift to any implicated cost for council. So if we were to impose a bylaw, what sort of, there's going to be some cost implication for council. I mean, we have bylaws, and whatever act we decide or whatever path we decide to go down, there's always something that we have to do or to impose or monitor or reinforce or whatever. So what sort of cost would there be for council? And presumably with any sort of bylaw we need some communication and education to our public. So again, what sort of cost implications would there be for council? And would the fire service be willing to contribute in that
Councillor
anyway.
Forsyth, I'm just going to get the GM to answer the first bit of that question, cost to council.
Well, look, I think it's extremely minimal, very small. I mean, the establishment of the bylaw is a process that we would do with our staff, and there'd be some very minimal engagement costs, and thereafter I don't see it as a big expense at all.
Okay, so let's say we go to fire ban one.
On that point,
Hang on.
there's a reference right at the start to the fact that there being a budget for this, so there must be, if there's a budget for it, there must be an amount. It's right on the start.
There's a budget generally for just bylaw policy development per se, so.
It says it's singular here, a bylaw.
Okay, yeah, so.
Yeah, sorry, Margaret.
I'm just thinking about our water comms strategy, and if we're talking about levels of prohibition, etc., you've got to underpin those sorts of decisions with a really good comms plan. Otherwise, you're going to end up, the council's going to end up copying the flag.
So I guess the question is who drives, once the fire service decide we think we need a fire ban, you come to us, what happens then?
So we've had conversations with the fire service about this in terms of communications as a whole throughout summer, whether it was with a bylaw or without a bylaw, and our need to communicate better with our community. So the fire service have indicated that they are willing to share the cost on any communications to do with that sort of thing. The amount would purely depend on what sort of bylaw we're talking about, what sort of restrictions we're talking about, when they come in place. So in terms of working that out, that would come in the second part of this bylaw process, of actually saying, okay, this is what we're proposing, and from then you can work out what the budget of that would be. But you can't, it's very hard to work out what the budget will be when you don't actually know what we're proposing yet.
I think the other comment I would make is that generally if there's going to be a fire ban in the city, there'll be one in the areas around the city as well. And if you recall the last couple of summers, there has been fire bans, isn't there, around the rural areas around the city. And so there's already an awareness being created by that.
Okay,
Your Worship.
Look, I won't ask these questions, I'll wait.
Okay, I just have one question. Under the Forest and Rural Fires Act, it talks about managing the forest and rural fires. We've got I think 650 odd rural properties within our city boundary. Would they come under a this bylaw, or do they come under what defines rural property? Is it by boundary or by use?
If it's within the gazetted urban area, which I'm picking up you're saying,
yeah,
is that it's covered by the urban.
So
it's not covered by rural.
Okay, so the amount of rural properties within our city boundary can burn tyres, hay, do whatever they do. We can't stop that unless we have a bylaw. They don't come under the Rural and Forest Act. Okay, thank you. That was my only question. So if there are no more questions...
We're not allowed to burn tyres. That's very
clear.
Well,
no, okay, thank you. Thank you for that advice. I won't be burning tyres tomorrow. If there are no further questions, I'm happy to put a motion on the board. So I am going to move the recommendation in the report on page 26 with the addition under C, that's to change C to read, Council resolved that a statement of proposal be drafted and reported to a council briefing ahead of the Strategy and Policy Committee on the 3rd of September 2014.
Madam Chair, I'm wondering if I could ask you a question here in relation to your motion.
Yeah.
I see where you're heading, but point B rather begs the question. It says that we've already decided that a bylaw was the most appropriate, and I suspect a number of people around the table are thinking, well, I'm willing to look at what the detail of one is, but I haven't yet decided whether point B is correct or not, and I don't know whether you'd be willing. It's almost like if you had A and C, you don't really need B, because C is enough to get staff to do the work and bring it back to us. And it doesn't say that we've prejudged what the final outcome is like B sort of does.
I'm going to go to the GM to answer that one.
So we can certainly come to a briefing. It's at a point in time we will need a resolution that says a bylaw needs to be determined. So if you did not pass B and just merely had C, we would have to come back with both we determine them and have a statement of proposal. So we'd have to pass that resolution at the next stage.
So I'm going to keep with my motion. Then if I have a seconder.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Wilson. So do
Then
you
I'll
want
move
to
an
signal?
amendment that's,
Yeah, I'll second that.
that's just with A and C without B.
Okay. And you're seconding that, Deputy Mayor?
Can I just ask Councillor McPherson, what you're wanting to see is the proposed bylaw, isn't
Yes,
it?
yes, and sorry, it should actually
Yep.
say that the statement of proposal for a bylaw.
Because you,
Yes.
I think like a lot of us, want to see well, what actually would the bylaw look like. I don't know whether a statement of proposal is a lot of lead-in, when actually we just want to look at the bylaw, and what staff would put in the bylaw, have a discussion about it, and if we think that's right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well,
Because I think there's a step before there is the statement of proposal, which requires further work. And
My understanding was that a thing called statement of proposal is the legal first step of the bylaw. So that's
Yeah.
yeah, but it
Well, actually,
includes the bylaw.
There's actually two legal steps. One is that we determine that a bylaw is required. The second step is then that you then have a statement of proposal. So
Which
I hear
is the bylaw.
the comment is that you would rather see the draft content of the bylaw, the shape of the bylaw, prior to
Workshop.
in a workshop sense,
Okay, I'm
prior to agreeing that a bylaw is the appropriate mechanism, and then asking us to do a statement of proposal.
Yeah, look, I'm happy with that.
Because I think with respect, I think it's, what actually does it look like? Because I had a look at other council bylaws, and I have to say there is a broad range. And in fact, empowering whom to declare a fire ban, there's a broad range as well. And the mechanisms to go about that. So I guess what I'm saying is there isn't actually one size fits all, although I did hear that helpfully there's a template
This is
that's
why
been
I don't like this.
prepared, which I think is a very sensible idea. So it's often in the nuances that, there'll be a lot of discussion.
Your Worship,
I'm
I
happy
understand
to
the
kind of-
chair is trying to work something out with the general manager
Yeah,
on
sorry.
that line.
Right.
Okay, so look, I'm happy to take B out, and hearing the views around the table then, what if, is everyone going to be happy with the report we received and that staff report back on the issues or on what a bylaw would look like, back to a
With the
council.
content of a draft
Content of a
bylaw.
draft bylaw
Council briefing.
to a council briefing ahead of the 3 September strategy and policy. Is everyone happy with that?
Yep. And what that would then imply is that at that meeting or a subsequent meeting, if the council wished to go forward, you'd have to pass a resolution around both a determination and a statement of proposal. Yep.
Can I just ask, when is the next date for a briefing?
There's a meeting, I think, in mid-August, Your Worship.
I'm just asking the committee people, when's the next briefing date?
I don't have that information with me, but I can get that for you.
I would be presuming that one would be organised well enough in advance of
Well,
the
the
strategy
date's
meeting.
already booked in the
Well,
diary, so
we'll
what
lock in
date
a
is it?
date. Not on here, I'll have to find out for you.
I believe it's mid-August.
We'll just wait 1 second, because I think we need a date booked in to the resolution.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's sensible, so I'm just looking at my own diary to find when it is. Surely someone knows when the briefing is. Surely.
I had a briefing on the 26th of August listed.
Okay, so is that, I guess the reason I wanted to know the date is that in time then for the 3rd September meeting?
About a week ahead of the meeting.
Not really enough time.
No, it's not.
Yes, it's on the 26th of August and,
All right, so how about that B, that staff report back to the, what did you say? 26th of August, council briefing with a draft.
Draft content.
Draft content of the bylaw. We'll leave the strategy and policy committee meeting off.
Okay.
Good. Right. Any speakers? Oh, so I've moved that. Councillor Wilson has seconded that. Any speakers on that? Councillor Gallagher, you did reserve your right. Yes, you did.
No, I was quite
Early on.
interesting discussion. I thought it was going to be a really short amount. I just want to say that obviously I certainly accept, in my view, the presumption of a bylaw, but more than happy to obviously see the details. So I come from that point, but absolutely, logically, you don't say you're going to have a bylaw until you see the detail, and also we'll be very interested in the education that goes around that. And I want to acknowledge our current representative of the New Zealand Fire Service here today and the excellent work you do around education and community interaction. I think that's just absolutely fantastic. And I think some of your observations today have been very, very helpful from my point of view as a layperson. But one of the things I'm interested in the report is bylaw plus education, and quite interested in experiences where the fire service rock up to a house and you think, well, the fire service is your house, gee whiz, better put that fire out. And then you get some legal issues, which is quite interesting, actually. It's quite, you know, as there's an old North Country saying, now it's so queer as folk, and quite amazing, really, honestly, that people would actually question the fire service at your front door. No, I'm not going to put out the fire. Oh, I think you should, sir. That's interesting. So without further ado, thank you. I support this, and it's been very interesting.
Thank you, Councillor Gallagher. Councillor Tooman?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I wish to speak for the motion.
Sure.
This is a case where we've had the professional firefighters in the city come to us and ask us to assist in managing these nuisance fires during the dry weather and that, and we just seem to be complicating it all. I think common sense must prevail. Surely if we've got a professional organisation who's come to us for assistance, I think we're duty bound to give that assistance. And so the only way we're really going to survive is that every organisation within the city works together, and I'll be voting for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor King?
Yeah, I'm speaking against this motion. I'd just like to remind you that we've had a drought and another season with less rainfall than that drought last year. And why didn't our comms kick in then? Why didn't the fire services comms kick in then? Why wasn't money spent then to actually tell the people of Hamilton that don't light open fires, use common sense? So our report here talks about part of this setting money aside for comms because we've got a fire ban. Why didn't we use that money earlier? Why didn't we use that money during the peak driest seasons we've ever just had, 2 in a row, and use our comms then to tell people of Hamilton to stop, to not burn and not light the fires outside? We can stop this now without spending money, without it going further. This isn't only, as Leo has just suggested, about nuisance fires during the fire season. This is nuisance fires all year round. This is about having a bonfire with your kids for the 21st birthday in the peak of our summer in a suburban area. This isn't Waipara or Waikato where we have underground peat fires, where we have big radiator forests which are very combustible, or hay paddocks. In big areas, this is a suburban area. As I say, I'm speaking against the motion. I won't be voting for it.
Councillor McPherson?
The trouble with what Councillor King has just said is that could be true 99.5% of the time, and the 0.5% of the time when it isn't true, when we need the ability to have a fire ban or to do something else, might be too late. And we can't spend 2 months getting it sorted then, and that's the reason that I'd swung from being in probably your camp before to thinking something perhaps is necessary, and I'd like to see the colour of it, the actual words in it. I myself have certainly had occasion to complain to the regional council, actually, because of air quality issues and traffic hazard issues about fires of burning tyres, in fact, on Perry Farms within the city boundary, and they took action quite quickly. So that's why I'm a bit dubious about whether it's actually necessary. So I want to see some more information. I'm fairly convinced we need the ability to have fire bans. I'm not all that convinced about the nuisance fire argument, so I'd like to hear more. So I'm betwixt and between, so I think we need to at least see a little bit more before we make a decision.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Look, our report on page 26 actually highlights the fire brigade raised their concerns in year 2012 and 2013 and highlighted their concern. So I think bureaucracy has just taken some time to get here. The second point I would make is, you know what, when emergency services walk in the door and they ask council for some help to protect us all, I think I can feel pretty sure in saying that their motivation is anything other than our safety, and that ultimately they will use the power when they need to use the power. And it may be, and let's hope it's never, that I don't want to have been making a decision where I subsequently found out that if I'd given them the power, they could have stopped a problem becoming a huge problem. So from my point of view, this is a no-brainer. How many times do an emergency service come in and ask just for a little bit of help to implement a bylaw that they will implement when they think's professionally required?
Thank you, Councillor. Any further speakers?
Just very quickly, I was supportive of Andrew's position previous to the meeting, and I think I should explain to him why I'm going to change my mind now. I think that the issue, there are two issues here that I've seen that are different. That we are in the situation where we've got a countryside that's tinder dry, and we are unable to put in a fire ban. I think it's irresponsible to prevent that from occurring. The situation I think that Andrew's concerned with is the 21st for your daughter or sort of something, the bonfire outside, the barbecue, the banquet, the bonfire outside. If I have some confidence in the fire service being able to determine what is a nuisance fire and what is not, what is reasonable to put up with for one night or versus doing it day after day after day and burning copper or burning tyres and things like that. So I can understand why, if they don't have the power to do that, the warrant situation, there is a degree to which we do need to be able to protect a person from second-hand, from nuisance, I guess, is a legal term. So I now support where we're going. I haven't seen the bylaw yet.
Thank you. Right, if there are no further speakers, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Everyone, except for Councillor King. Yep. And all those against? Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thanks to staff. No, not yet. Right, committee, please turn to page 22, item 8.
We have no jokes, do we?
Pardon? No, we know. No, Councillor Millett. 22, we're on item 8, Hamilton Cemeteries and Crematorium Management Plan Review. Welcome.
Yes,
You can take the report as read if there are anything that you needed to highlight in the report. Oh, we've had a mover by Councillor Wilson. We read it. Hang on.
It's a dead cert, this one.
Your Worship.
Look, I was just going to say, I'm not sure that, look, thanks for the report and everything, but I'm just wondering whether we need to establish a formal working group for this, to be honest. And I did raise it with the chair prior to this meeting, because I sort of sense that there's a lot of technical stuff in this, but I would have a raise that I think there are some historical aspects of this that need some input from the Heritage panel. So Madam Chair, I'm not sure that I can support the recommendation as is, but have you got
I have, thank you, Your Worship, and you did raise that with me, and I spoke to Lance we're suggesting changing D to read that staff develop a draft management plan using the Heritage Advisory Panel to give advice on heritage aspects, and this draft be reported back to a workshop for councillor feedback. I think that covers off your concerns.
Yes, it's just, it seemed that well, it would be quite technical, and I did wonder whether it might be better.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, so that's been moved by councillor Wilson, seconded by Her Worship. Are there any other questions on that? This is just setting up the process for reviewing the plan.
The workshop gives us the opportunity.
Yes, it does, Councillor Gallagher.
Because there are lots of issues in there.
There are.
Absolutely, but that's good, and very happy with the heritage.
Happy with that?
That's good, excellent,
Great.
very important, that's
Great.
good.
Skeletons and
Okay. I see there had to be a joke, didn't there? Hopefully our online viewers didn't hear that one. So that's, if there is no further questions, that's been moved by councillor Wilson, seconded by, who seconded that? Was it Her Worship?
Her Worship.
Any debate? No. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Right, where are we? Item number 10, page 30, the Strategic Roundup Report. This is an item for information only. So we'll take the report as read. Any questions from the committee?
Happy to move it.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
Yeah,
Person?
under the key issues, point 12, would be the third bullet point down. There's a comment that the most recent version of the private plan change addresses the key issues of concern for future proof, and I was just wondering if someone could outline what those were.
So,
The real, just a summary.
yep, so I'm just looking to Brian here. Unfortunately, Susan Henderson would have answered that, but unfortunately she's away today, so.
I suspect
Wouldn't have a clue.
probably give as good an answer as what you'd be used to. But I suspect it's about the long-term clarity for the area that become inland port and logistics. And the future-proof strategy focused on a 50-year time frame would be wanting to see that unfold over the 10-year horizon.
So in other words, a comprehensive sort of precinct type plan as opposed to one-off short-term development plans.
Very much so, the right linkages in place, the big building blocks, if you like, being located in place and acknowledging, I guess, Madam Chair, that it's a long-term time frame and making sure those big blocks are in place.
Thank you.
I did have a couple of different points. This
Sure.
is also just below that, number 13, Southern Links, the evidence, the designations hearing. So I was just wanting to check with Chris, I guess, through you, whether this, once that designation's in place, that landowners in the area will be, under certain circumstances, will then be able to apply either to the City Council or to NZTA for the land purchase thing to kick in if there's situations where they want to get exit?
That's exactly the situation. It'll probably take some time because I think the hearing started on the 21st of July. There'll no doubt be a number of Environment Court appeals, and that period will have to play its way through, and then the land ownership issues will kick in. So I think there was quite a good discussion with Council the other day about the process around this and our position on it. But yes, that will follow up with the consensus.
Thanks. And the last one I had, Madam Chair, was the last bullet point on page 31 there. It says the City Council is tracking well in terms of its settlement pattern targets for growth under the future-proof growth strategy. That was okay for the city, but what about our surrounding areas, particularly the district council, with all the outstanding consents for developments, lifestyle block type development right on the fringe of the city, are they still keeping within the agreements, given that they were, originally they wanted to do something quite different from what Future Proof came up with? I sort of want the picture of how we're going in that area.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm really pleased the way both of our neighbours have addressed the concerns about the impacts on the city. So I think there's going to be an issue for us simply with all of the lots that have been created over time that haven't yet been built on. So we've got this legacy number that are hanging around out there that are yet to come through and be built on. Waikato have significantly increased the minimum subdivision and rural controls, and Waikato have got very solid controls as well.
So if those Waikato lots that are not yet built on all kick in the next 10, 15 years, is that going to upend future-proof sort of settlement plan, you know, the village growth around Gordonton and so forth, or we're going to sort of lose that sort of thrust?
Look, Madam Chair, it shouldn't undermine, I don't think, at all the settlement pattern of concentrating in the settlements. What we're told is there are various different motivations for rural subdivision, and a lot of those lots don't necessarily be used or aren't used for building on for estate planning purposes and all sorts of other things. But ultimately, I guess the horse is bolted for those, and in due course, houses will likely be built on most of those lots. The full impact of that, we'll just have to wait and see. Certainly when you see all those lots on a little map, it looks like a serious case of the measles, I've got to say. And we'll just have to manage that issue there.
Chicken pox, I think.
Your Worship, if I can just add something to that, and just a couple of points. If councillors are interested in some more detail on this, you should look at the agenda for the last Future Proof meeting and the one before that, because this did contain the map and the information, and we do get that. So it does show the maps and what's been happening. Secondly, that was summarised in a presentation to Future Proof with all the numbers you're talking, you know, that you're interested in, Dave. And can I ask that be circulated? It's just safe to reading all the detail. And thirdly, can there be a note taken that in part of the sort of context setting for the 10-year plan, can the information that was presented, you know, the summary of the information presented about the impact of subdivision around the city boundary be included in that context setting presentation by staff for that 10-year plan, because it is a relevant matter. I have to say, Councillor McPherson, it looked good in terms of what we're trying to achieve on the maps. But you're right, there still are a number of resource consent applications, you know, that have been granted that have not yet been actioned. And it does impact on the city and how we're going to face that, not only our own growth, but accommodating for our catchment area of about 250,000 people who use all the facilities in the city. And I think that would be useful. So if that could just be noted for them. Great, thanks.
I just have a question of the GM. Do we have an update from Waikato District Council about their recommendation on moving forward with the water business case?
Yes, we do, through the chair. So their council met this Monday, and they have passed a similar resolution to that of ourselves and Waipa. So that is to move ahead with a business case analysis of the waters for the three councils, looking at, as per our resolution, the status quo, an enhanced shared service model, and the full CCO model. Likewise, they have asked that, like our council, that we report back with the final outcome of the process, the competitive market process, with the final scope and the final recommended consultant who may undertake that work. In addition, their council has also asked that at the same time the staff also look at a study with Watercare to manage and operate their water assets. So that's to be considered alongside those other proposals. And I'd also note that Waipa Council in their resolution also asked that, in addition to the three that we are looking at, look at a standalone CCO for their own council. So in effect, there is councils will look at, there are 5 elements to be looked at here. All 3 councils are looking at the status quo, enhanced shared service and a CCO model for water delivery. Waikato was asked, with some of their relationship with Watercare, to examine what a Watercare model would look like. Watercare was to provide, I guess, an enhanced model to Waikato, and Waipa have asked for some information around a standalone CCO for just Waipa Council. So the three organisations are now in the process of working through a request for expression of interest process. We'll go out to the market, and in due course we'll come back to each council with the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe?
Yes, I've got a question on which involves paragraph 16 and 20 around demographics. And this is around future proofing with demographic projection data that we're expecting to get from the University of Waikato, not only for this council, but also it appears to be on Waikato Regional Council's work portfolio too. Do we have a date as to when we're likely to get this information? Because I'm thinking that, you know, there's a lot of this information is going to be pretty vital in terms of not only the city planning its growth, but also our 10-year plan, which we're commencing the journey on within the next month or so.
So that information is currently with us. So we're working concurrently with that information now.
We have got the report, have we?
We've got an initial version of that report, yes, and we're working actively with the university and their consultants.
Okay, fine. Now my next question just deals with 24 on the Property Council. And am I reading this correctly? Am I getting the impression that the Local Government Commission will not necessarily look at the Property Council's submission to them in respect to some form of unitary plan until the Property Council has consulted back to the councils who are likely to be affected? Is that a reasonably accurate interpretation of those?
No, I don't think it is. The Property Council, when they met with the Mayoral Forum, outlined the draft content of their discussion paper and expressed that it is merely a discussion draft, that they don't expect it will be ready prior to October at the earliest if they do intend to lodge it. They have no specific position as to whether they will lodge that with the Local Government Commission at this stage. They are seeking feedback. They are looking to make some further changes to the discussion document. The comment there relating to the Local Government Commission was that they noted that there is a discussion, I understand, at the Local Government New Zealand conference next week as to whether the Local Government New Zealand may advance a proposition that a Royal Commission of Inquiry be used to replace the Local Government Commission to look at local government reorganisation. Now that was an arrangement that was in place some years ago, I think in the 80s, when there was local government change. So that's just more of a how change may be considered across local governments generally. But certainly the Property Council are very much in discussion listening phase. They're not in a position of lodging at this time.
Thank you.
Councillor Gallagher?
Yes, I'll do the local government. So basically the intending to ask, that's not a local government, is it? Sorry, that's not I mean, it's news to me. I'm aware of a motion, but it's news to me that they're asking for a Royal Commission. So I'll be interested in just...
I understand there's going to be a remit. The CEO was at the Mayoral Forum meeting for the item. He explained that there was going to be a discussion as to whether they would support a remit or not around that.
So I'm not sure.
Just so we're clear, we have received no remit in relation to that matter for the Local Government Conference. So I don't know what that's about.
So certainly Malcolm Alexander did explain that to the Mayoral Forum. So whether that's going to be more of a discussion, an informal discussion, but certainly they had indicated that was going to be the case.
I mean, obviously. And then brief question on waters, and I'll just make bring a comment if I can.
Mm-hmm.
The waters one now, the Watercare Waikato District Council, they're looking at, do I take it with this expression of interest in the work to be done around the options for water in the central Waikato? Waikato District Council now put into the mix, the water mix, Watercare.
That is just for their own council area. So as I understand it, and of course I'm speaking on their behalf, they have some arrangements or they're in process of negotiation to purchase some water for some of their northern communities from Watercare. So their council is asked to consider what would an expanded arrangement with Watercare look like for Waikato District Council, whether that by means of operating or leasing or running their water services.
Are they going to do that as a parallel exercise separate from this body of work, or will this be incorporated into this body of
It
work?
would be a parallel or incorporated piece of work, but entirely funded by Waikato District Council.
Right, and then in the Waipa, do I say there's some parallel work now because they are looking at a CCO for Waipa only? That would be a parallel piece of work.
That is correct. And so one of the thoughts is that it may well be that the consultant who is commissioned to do the pieces of work that our council has resolved and the other 3 councils resolved may also be available to do the specific work that Waikato and Waipa have asked at their cost, because a lot of the information will be similar information.
Because you see, it's an unusual situation, isn't it? We're going to allocate a sum of money to a collaborative exercise, and I'm just trying to work out then your 2 partners saying, well, we're going to do some other work outside that particular exercise, potentially with different consultants, whereas the brain would say, why aren't you doing all this in the one room? Why aren't you doing this all in the one exercise so that all 3 councillors, irrespective of my reservations, would see this all on the table at the same time. So it's quite an unusual, I would have thought it's quite an unusual way of doing some work and probably extra cost.
Can I say our desire is to try and get all those 5 different pieces of work done at the same time by the same consulting team, admitting or noting that the work for Waikato and the work for Waipa that's specific to those councils is entirely at their own cost. But it would be useful for it all to happen at the same time. So we're very transparent and open and informative process.
With respect, the train is going off the rails a little, because this was all about 3 local authorities collaborating together. This is all about a grand or a vision, and it seems to me I'd be suggesting that you'd be going back to the 2 others, or the mayoral forum, and readdressing that, because I find that really quite unusual, to be honest. I'm not being negative, because I accept the will of this council to proceed down a particular line, but it seems quite unusual that the logic would be that those questions would be considered in the one report.
Yes, look, I think that we are still very much on the same railway tracks, because the core study is the 3 areas of examining the status quo, examining the enhanced shared service, and examining the CCO option, exactly as was reported to our council following the Peter Weinfeld report. As is the right of any other individual council, they've asked that whilst considering that in their own personal situation, in the case of Waikato, where we have a relationship with Watercare, can we understand how that may look as well, at the same time for our decision-making process. So I think it does make sense for each of their own council conference.
Thank you. I don't know if it's up. I'll take it again.
Question, or then I'll come back to you for debate.
Yeah, look, we may be on the same railway tracks at the moment, but I think someone's just built a couple of sidings just up ahead of us, and we're not sure which way the points are heading at the moment, because if I was a Waikato district resident, which I am, I'd be concerned about Watercare suddenly being in charge of my water, but if I was a Hamilton City resident, ratepayer, I'd be concerned that Watercare right around the 3/4 of my boundary and the potential sort of future impacts of that. I don't think that is part of anything we were told about in the briefing or workshop session. The idea of a standalone CCO for ourselves, that Waipa's doing, that was briefly mentioned. We had a bit chewed the fat over that a bit, sort of concept at least, but not of Watercare, the Auckland one being down in our neck of the woods very much, if you look at the boundary of Waikato District. Waikato District houses currently quite a few thousand and get trickle feed water from Hamilton City right now, so clearly something that could be a close and uncomfortable relationship. So I'm not even sure that's in our interest to have Watercare considered at all.
I think to be clear, Hamilton City Council is not considering Watercare.
I understand that. I heard that.
This is Waikato.
I'm talking about them surround this, almost like we're the inside of the donut.
I think, and I'm happy to circulate the report that they received at their council meeting on Monday, and you will see that it's it's a part of the decision-making process. They're just saying that as part of any good business case process for them, in addition to the 3 options that we have considered, they'd like to understand more about Watercare, given the Watercare has a significant interaction with them already. They abound Watercare. Let's understand it from their context.
Thank you.
I'm happy to circulate that report.
Yeah, I think that's a
Could
good
we have
idea.
copies of those
Yeah.
resolutions with that circulation, with Waipara and Waikato ones?
Yeah, good idea. So, debate, councillor Gallagher?
Yeah, no, just commentary. I mean, obviously receiving the report, and I think this is excellent, and this to me brings on one sort of page, so to speak, that all the high-level stuff that's happening in the region. I think it's really good that this committee is a high-level strategic policy forward-looking committee. That this obviously will be a regular report, and I commend that. I just want to support the Mayor in stressing how important it is for the material from this report, the detailed material, then to feed into our 10, I'm stating the obvious, but I'm saying, just want to emphasise how crucial it is that when we start our 10-year plan work, that all of these key sort of strands of work fits in. And I just want to go back to item 24 and say that I don't necessarily agree, obviously, with personally the form perhaps of what the Property Council is proposing, but I'm reflecting again that the City of Hamilton is one of the smallest local authorities, smaller than the Chatham Islands even. I think it's one of the smallest local authorities, maybe with the exception of Porirua Hut. And, we're seeing day by day, I think, increasing evidence of the problem we have because of that relative smallness in terms of some of the cross-boundary stuff. We're going to be talking about funding huge infrastructure and who pays for where, why and how. So I think this is a really good regular report, Madam Chair. I think that's excellent, but I really am looking forward for all of those key streams of work to be, feeding in obviously to our 10-year plan exercise. And also want to say I think there's a point where this city is going to have to move into a position at the right time to clearly state what it wants around boundaries. We're doing some good collaborative stuff. I commend that. But I think there's the elephant in the room that keeps charging around the room that is not yet being addressed, obviously. And I know that there's a time when that will happen. And I suspect that will start to happen during the 10-year plan process.
Thank you, councillor Gallagher. So it's been moved by Her Worship the Mayor, seconded by myself. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. We're going to stop for 10 minutes for afternoon tea. Back at 4:15.
Is this item 11?
Yes, item 11, page 35. Welcome, Richard. You'll move it, Your Worship. I'm happy to second it. Any questions? Councillor Gallagher.
Yes. Just around... I'm not going to necessarily want to litigate the policy, but obviously in terms of 5.1, so I'm happy to make sort of some comment now and then just ask you a procedural question.
I suppose I can speak, being a member of the CCO subcommittee, that we spent some time working up this policy
Yeah.
and discussing what was appropriate. One of the objectives was to get clarity. Because the previous policy really was a little bit ambiguous. So the thinking behind it was to get clarity, to make it really clear the sorts of skills that we required, and to make sure that the policy was workable from a CCO board point of view. So this is the policy we came up with that the CCO subcommittee signed off, and this is now a recommendation through to this committee to approve. Councillor Mallett, you're the chair of that committee.
So thank you for stepping in whilst I was
closed. Yes, so I've just explained that this is a recommendation from our subcommittee, having gone through and spent quite a bit of time on this and the content of it, and wanting to get a lot more clarity in the policy, because the one that this one replaces had some ambiguity in it.
Councillor Mallett, did you want to add to that?
No, I'm sure Her Worship has done an outstanding job. Just 4.4, there's a tiny typo, because I assume once we approve this, we approve the thing as it is. It says no more than 2 as in to you, and then 2 as in the numeral 2. Well,
I thought you would have typed this out yourself on your trusty little typewriter.
I typed it once. Her Worship typed it the second time.
Right, thank you. Is it a question? Comment? Well, I'm going to go to Councillor Gallagher first. Yep.
Questions, and I'll reserve right a comment at the end.
Yep.
Look, just the issue of the exceptional circumstances, you know, as a general, we appoint independent directors. You just have a sense of what we mean by exceptional circumstances?
If there's a particularly skill-based requirement, that you can have a general, boards of directors typically try and have some generalists and a person who knows the industry. If you have a situation where your man who knows the industry, or your woman, the director who knows the industry is the one who's stepping down, and there's no one else who can bring, you might want to consider that person for another term until someone with the requisite skills comes on. Maybe I will just say a few things. The three, Martin, you picked up probably the three things that I think that might be worthwhile looking at is 4.7, 4.6 and 4.7, 8 and 9 is that the two full terms, unless otherwise, so you might want to question that. You might want to question the payment, remuneration or otherwise of elected members. I personally think that we should probably do it for nothing, but other members might query that, because when you're a director of a company, you are responsible for a lot of things. So, and doing that for nothing, you can query that. That's a reasonable question to raise.
Yeah, I mean, historically, we'll take the remuneration first. Historically, when we've had councillors on, there was some sort of cross thing. So was it would recognise
my recollections from the early days when we had some councillors on the Novotel board. I remember they were paid, and some refused. They were paid, and then some directors would not take the money. I think the CEO may have been on the board. I can't recall whether he took the money or not.
Paid to council.
I was also on the board for a period of time as well, and I was on the board for a period of time as well, and that was paid through to council, not to myself.
Okay, so the money came to council. So you did the work, but the money came to council.
Yeah, but that wasn't the case earlier on.
Could I just, before we continue, could I just ask I couldn't really see any changes between this policy and the old policy, any substantive changes other than the remuneration and appointments will now be done through the CCO subcommittee. Is that correct?
So a key part of this policy, to what Her Worship mentioned, was to ensure that it was crisp and direct, and that was achieved. Basically ensuring that it referenced the terms of reference and delegations to the CCO subcommittee. It outlined a lot clearer the appointment process, so to ensure that it was clearer, and it made sure that it focused on the appointment of independent skills-based appointments, but it did not include elected members or council officers, and that was that reference that Councillor Gallagher referred to in terms of exceptional circumstances. And it established, like Councillor Mallett mentioned, the making sure it's clear that the appointments do not serve any more than 2 consecutive terms, and outlining a scenario whereby they could come back if there was a year-long break a term break from being a member. And that also clarified to ensure that it was clear in respect of the remuneration of appointees is subject to the approval of the board thereon, but that will come to the CCO subcommittee for approval.
Mm-hmm. Which is, as I just pointed out, really the only major change. But the language is a lot crisper and straight to the point.
Absolutely.
All the waffle has been extracted and thrown away.
Yes.
Department of Fantasy Words was not involved.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Look, I just had 3 quick points to pick up on. One was a point that Councillor Mallett made around whether councillors should be paid or not. This was quite a debate about 12 months ago, I think, down in Dunedin. I may have the wrong council, I think it was Dunedin, where a couple of councillors were getting like an extra $114,000 a year. It was a significant amount of money. Now, that may have been their total remuneration, including the board payments, but it did cause some considerable controversy, so that is a big issue. In 4.6, the very last word, pleasure, I just wonder if that's the wrong word, and would discretion be a bit better? Pleasure is one of those funny words that has other connotations. I know.
It doesn't have a legal, that has a legal definition.
Does it? Okay, well, that's fine. I'm happy to accept
my understanding, just to be clear, what we meant by that is that this is not an employment situation where you have to have 3 written warnings, all that sort of carry. We can chop you at the drop of a knife.
Okay, because that was one of the other points, that we'd covered off the appointment, but we hadn't covered off termination, the removal of directors, and whether that needed to be spelt out more clearly. I
think the pleasure thing means we can, that covers everything.
Okay.
It's also supported by the fact there'll be an annual review of the performance of the directors as well by the CCO subcommittee as well, which provides a vehicle, should they not be performing, to bring into effect 4.6 as well.
Thank you.
And the last point was just around the level of remuneration. The previous time, when this has become a New Zealand debate, there were concerns around the level of money paid to independent directors that were way above, for example, Hamilton International Airport has always had what I consider to be a much lower regional level, and there needs to be great care taken that this doesn't suddenly become a $40,000 or $50,000 a year appointment when it's out of step with the rest of the Waikato. Auckland, Wellington, different matter, but we need to be very cautious that we don't set these organisations up to make the board members extremely well remunerated when you might compare it to a councillor level of remuneration.
And
So
can I
just
that's a very valid point. And as I said before, this is extra work to your council work, and it isn't particularly. It's those who have been involved as being a director of a held finance company and those sorts of things. There are huge responsibilities on you if things go wrong. So we've said an exceptional matter, unless otherwise determined. But the general feeling of the committee was that if elected members or staff go on them, it should be unpaid. But if there are exceptional circumstances, we could vary that.
Thank you.
But I am well aware that that there is huge responsibility when you're director of a company, so it's not something to be taken lightly.
And sorry, Chair, there was just one last situation that occurred with the hotel company here, and there were changes there where, yes, councillors did get paid, and then it was cut down to half, and then I joined temporarily while we were changing CEOs, and I got paid nothing, and that was fine. But the debate around there was the removal of the hotel discount card, that the directors were able to access discounts, and the council at the time felt that the council appointees should have no access to the discounted hotel rates around the world that were offered. So these are small details that can build up into big controversial issues that need to be quite clearly spelt out if we are to appoint councillors to those boards.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Yeah, and I compliment the committee. I think you've sort of reset or reframed the rules that apply, in terms of the audit office, and I do think what you're saying is under exceptional circumstances we would revisit if we determined that there was one of our numbers, like a parent company would put a director on, nominate a director to a company in which they had shares, then obviously I'd want to revisit the criteria, particularly if it was a trading organisation and there was a degree of personal risk to the person, and we're obviously putting that person there to ensure an oversight of our interests, because what I'm trying to say is an independent director is fine, but sometimes you put one of your directors on to make sure your interests are met, and then I'd want to revisit the remuneration based on Audit New Zealand, the audit, but also in terms of the risk and the job and all of that. But I think really you're saying that in that situation you guys would trigger a report back to council on that issue. Is that correct? Under the exceptional.
Somewhere in here it says that the
so
we talked about transparency in here, yes.
Yeah,
so that's a good point. That isn't specifically mentioned, but I think you could take it and given it somewhere we talk about.
Councillor Miller, I'm just going to get Richard to answer that, if you can.
I'm not too sure exactly how to answer that question.
Could I just
Could the mayor?
Look, people, I think it's really important, a couple of things here. First of all, we need something that's clear and everyone can understand. I think we've achieved that. Number two, the intention behind this policy is blatantly clear, right? We're not going on these boards unless there are exceptional circumstances. And I think we all, from the past, agree that's a good thing. Number three, if we go on these boards, we're not going to be paid. It's part of our job, unless there are exceptional circumstances, and I would expect those will be rare. And this policy says that. Now, there can be all manner of scenarios that may arise. Of course there might be. But what this policy also says is that if you're on these boards, you've got to sign off on a job description and you're monitored every year. If a councillor is going to be approved on one of these boards, then clearly there would be a contract, if you like, with that councillor as to what that means. You're appointed on the board under this policy and you don't receive remuneration or any other entitlements. I mean, the idea behind the policy is clarity, so that everyone's clear what the roles are. Now, if this committee doesn't agree with those underpinnings, then that's where the discussion should be focused, to be frank, because that is what this policy says. So, sorry, Councillor O'Leary, but really, I mean, yes, there's all manner of scenarios that could arise, but actually, that's the philosophy under the policy. Do people agree with it or not?
Thank you.
Are
we doing, sorry, hang on,
Point of procedure.
Councillor, hang on, Gallagher, questions, because I've still got questions, but I know you've reserved first right of debate.
No, I'm still... questions?
Questions,
yes,
okay.
Yes, but I'm happy to line up wherever. But,
okay, no,
yes.
so you go now. Yep.
Okay. Look, the other thing which I wanted... look, I am going to ask, this is the forum to ask, and I do hear what a wish says in terms of clarity, but I think it's very legitimate I ask you guys, and you've done some good work. The issue of the two terms, you know, the notion that 2 terms, that's it, exception, unless there's exceptional circumstances. Can you just tease out a wee bit for me the logic of that?
That would again be the scenario where there's specific knowledge that one director has that is required by the board. I was talking about the general director versus the guy who knows the industry. An example might be the airport, and the airport's doing a whole lot of property development.
Yeah.
If the guy who's got some knowledge and property is at the end of his second term and we're unable to get someone who's got a little bit of property background, we might, for exceptional circumstances, suggest that person can, the CCO subcommittee might determine, well, look, there is an exception clause in our policy. This is a reason that triggers that exception clause, that we need someone with these specific skills to remain on the board. That person happens to be we need a person with those skills on the board. That person happens to be on the board. Unfortunately, they've just finished their second term. Let's use the exception clause in our policy and appoint him or her for another term.
See, the scenario I want to say, you know, say for example, Air New Zealand ends up owning 50% of Virgin. And Virgin's doing really, really well. And the governance combo is good, everything's all good, all right? There's this good skill mix. Why would you, and I don't know, why would you have an automatic rule that if things are going well and everything's all cool, you review, you know, you come up each time you consider whether a director's going to be reappointed, right? You'll look at, does the board need new skills, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering about the sort of the kind of artificial constraint.
Oh, sorry, your question.
Before you answer that, thank you, Councillor Gallagher. Look, I'm not going to allow a cross-table discussion. There are other people that need to
point of order.
have questions. I'm speaking that need to have questions answered. So sorry,
okay, point of clarification, if I may. I've asked what I thought was a question around the aspect of the policy that says you normally just do 2 unless there are exceptional circumstances. So my question was purely around the issue of, isn't that an artificial constraint? I think with respect, Madam Chair, it was a very legitimate question, and I'm not sure where else I'd ask that question but here.
We're going to go to Richard for these questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Gallagher, it's not uncommon for organisations to place a tenure on directors.
Right.
It's not all organisations do it, not all companies do it, but it's an attempt to ensure there is a revitalisation of the directorship involved, and 2 years is 2 terms, is a reasonable period of time. It's an attempt to ensure that the directors don't become stale, don't become captured, and there's a degree of innovation that's brought on by bringing new directors online as well. It provides, the trick is to make sure you don't have all of your directors coming up for their 2 years at the same time. So it may well be if we were in a position of setting up a new company, for example, that we would effectively not follow that rule at first to enable the directors to gain some momentum, so we only had one director rolling off at a reasonable period of time to avoid a complete loss of intellectual property from that governance side of things. So it is not uncommon to have a limited tenure.
Can I just check, is that different to what was in the old policy? Because my notes say it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same as what, so there's no change.
I think the clarification was the reappointment process for make sure it's clear that they can stand again following one term off.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson?
Yes, thanks. Look, I think the committee's done a reasonable job of coming up with the policy here. But I think there's one point I disagree with. I may not be supported around the council table, but I know it's certainly an issue that's becoming more and more a debate within the public arena, including it within the business community, and that's in relation to 4.1, where it talks about appropriate balances of skills, knowledge, etc., etc. All of those things I agree with, but it doesn't refer to the issue of gender balance. I'm not talking about gender equity, I'm talking about balance. In other words, consideration that of the issue being that there are very few female directors in businesses in New Zealand and worldwide, and that's becoming more of an issue as days go on in our community and generally around this country. So I would have hoped that the members of the committee might have looked at that as well and included something in relation to that. I think also when you're talking about a CCO, which is a public service owned organisation, you have some social issues that impinge on the operations potentially. I'm thinking of water supply, for instance, the issue of that's been debated, I know, by Watercare in Auckland in the past, whether there should be discounts for pensioners. And regardless of the outcome, the fact that they had that debate showed that they had a responsibility to at least consider that sort of issue. And I would have liked to have seen something in those couple of areas, and I thought the appropriate place for it might have been 4.1. You could have said that the point E should have the appropriate balance of skills, blah, 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 gender being one of those, and social, something to do with social involvement as well. Knowledge doesn't quite cover that, though, it impinges on that area. So that's one of my concerns with the policy. The other one is actually a concern with the previous council decision to delegate entirely the authority for appointment to the subcommittee, which I think it should remain as the council's job to make. I have no problem with the committee making a recommendation to council, but the council as a whole, or at least this committee, which includes the whole council, should be the one that makes that decision. But I know that wasn't the subcommittee's decision.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, look, just a question of clarification. At 4.6, all HCEC appointments to the board of the CEOs are at the HCEC pleasure. Is that consistent when in fact all these decisions would normally be made by the CCO subcommittee?
The CCO subcommittee is only responsible for the Hamilton City Council's mandate to appoint directors. So if we have a CCO which, like at a regional council, or I'm just talking hypothetically, they have a right to appoint. The Hamilton City Council may or may not, depending on the constitution of the actual CCO, because these things are actually companies, that will be determined by. So we're only responsible for this, any appointments that the Hamilton City Council has responsibility for. Nothing in our policy can give us the ability to blackball the Waikato Regional Council.
Councillor Wilson, you happy for Richard to answer?
So your question, Councillor Wilson, was does that 4.6 mean that council removes someone from the governing body of these entities versus CCO subcommittee removing it from the committee as well? Was that your question?
That's my question.
Yeah. So I wasn't involved in the debate behind that, and I would have assumed that was if the CCO, and I'm going to put this back to Councillor Mallett to answer this question now, if that was the CCO's appointment, committee's appointment, it should be their removal. Was that the, and I don't know whether or not that was the intent, so I'll put that back to Councillor Mallett.
I'm certainly going to reserve my comments for the debate. I'm actually really just trying to be helpful. I think there could potentially be some inconsistency. You've delegated to one party and then you're inconsistent with another name. So I think what you're saying is at the CCO pleasure, because we as the council, rightly or wrongly, have delegated this to a committee. And then in a document, you're referring it back to the entity that's delegated it. I'm simply saying that to be consistent, I think 4.6, the HCC shouldn't be there, it should be the CCO.
I suggest it needs to have the same wording as set up in 5.1, that it's the delegated authority of the CCO subcommittee to remove the member.
Right, we have moved into, actually.
So are we going to change that?
Well, it's 5.1 says, as per its delegated authority, the CCO's committee will approve all HCC appointees, because you're quite right, the HCC has delegated to the CCO.
Yeah.
So
it shouldn't matter.
Right. So it shouldn't be HCC, shouldn't be the HCC's pleasure, it's got to be at the CCO's.
No,
hang on a minute,
sorry.
I need to get, sorry councillors, I need to get some staff clear advice on this.
I think the advice from the CFO needs to be clear, and I think he's saying that there should be a wording change, and if that is the case, it should be built into the resolution when we.
So just trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
Disagree, Councillor Millett. So the change would be that in 4.6, just to be consistent with the wording, it's consistent with the wording that it would refer to the CCO subcommittee removing at their pleasure from this governance aspect.
Okay, can I just comment? I'm not a lawyer, so you could be right, but my understanding is that these are the Hamilton City Council's appointees.
Yes.
How the Hamilton City Council chooses to make those appointees is irrelevant. They are the Hamilton City Council's appointees. The fact that we've delegated that to the janitor or to the CCO subcommittee or to the whatever, but they are the Hamilton City Council's appointees. So I
and the subcommittee has delegated authority.
And I know you're being helpful, you, and I think it's right as it is.
Yeah, it's more of I think the wording is, I think the intent is what Councillor Mallett's referring to, and I was just questioning whether or not the wording could tidy that up.
Look, I think I support the CFO that the word HCC in 4.6 should be replaced by CCO subcommittee, and it just makes it consistent with 5.1.
Thank you.
Which would mean that the CCO subcommittee approves any appointees, and the CCO subcommittee has the authority to remove those that it has appointed, not those that are not the appointees. That is the will of the committee. We would change that in the resolution.
All right.
Chair, I'm happy to speak either to or fro if we're at that stage.
Okay, we are at debate stage, yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Look, I won't be supporting the recommendation. That's consistent with my position in regards to an earlier decision of council to have chosen to delegate its responsibilities, which I feel are very important and should be the mandate of the entire council, to the CCO. In saying that, I acknowledge the work the CCO has done in creating the document, and I appreciate it, that it's done in the right spirit. And I did want to point out the little inconsistency, and I think we've now got that resolved, that I don't support it because I have never supported the premise that that as an elected body we should empower a smaller subcommittee of council to make what is vital appointments on behalf of all the ratepayers, particularly in light of the fact that the ratepayers have an assumption that we as individual elected member councillors would play a role where in fact this policy doesn't enable it. But I accept the policy is the policy of council, but I don't intend to support it, and I accept that I will probably be the only one.
Right, thank you. Councillor Gallagher, you have had a question and debate, and Councillor McPherson had a question and debate. However, you can close this item off. I'd be delighted.
I'm actually now we're in the discussion.
We are in debate. Yes. But I was very loose at the beginning. There was discussion and debate happening.
Well, I wasn't under that impression, but...
Well, I'm chairing the meeting. I'm saying you can close us off with your wonderful, eloquent speech.
Certainly won't be as long as the Deputy Chair on the fire, and I acknowledge his rights there. The issue to me is I'm happy to support the policy as long as my dissent is recorded against 5.1. And if I have the procedural means to do that, then I'll be supporting the policy. If I don't have the procedural means, and that's your discretion, then I won't be supporting the policy for the simple reason that under 5.1, the debate, I'll admit, has been had. The majority of you have democratically decided that the appointment of directors, CCOs, etc., will be delegated to a small subcommittee. The natural extension of that is, should you establish a water care type CCO for water, which is about 20% of council's operation, counting wastewater and water, then the appointment of the governance of that body will be delegated to a subcommittee. At that point, I'll probably be seeking some legal advice, because I want to strongly say, and I feel this very, very strongly, that I believe that my capacity as a democratically elected councillor, in terms of governance oversight, is potentially going to be severely compromised because of 5.1. I feel that strongly. I know at this point I'm in the minority, and I look forward to the day when I can get the numbers to change what I think is a very bad precedent, because ultimately, in terms of 5.1, I'm ultimately still responsible for the decision. So I'm not reflecting on the good work of the CCO subcommittee. I'm not reflecting on your work to date in terms of the appointment. But what I think is very important in terms of my right as a governor, in terms of governance, is to actually to delegate, to bring those recommendations back to the full council. I don't think in essence it's going to change much in terms of who you appoint, but I think that's a very important check and balance, and it excludes me as an elected councillor from a very important decision that this council makes. So having said that, Madam Chair, if I can have a procedural situation where I'm able to dissent to 5.1, then it would be my intention to support the policy. The other thing I want to say is we spent quite some time debating a fire bylaw, and this was the right place for the committee to do it, and Councillor King was absolutely correct in exercising his right to ask a series of questions. I don't make any apology for my right to want to actually ask a series of questions both to Councillor Mallett and staff and tease out some aspects. That's where it should be had. Having said that, I want to compliment the CCO committee on what I think has been a pretty good piece of work. Now I've managed to clarify one or two aspects. Madam Chair, question. Can I just have some guidance from you as to whether I'm in a position to record my dissent to 5.1?
So that has been moved. The recommendation on page 35 has been moved by Her Worship and seconded by me. If you want to record your dissension on one particular point, you'd have to move an amendment.
Okay, well, I'll just move an amendment because I'm aware that it's current policy, it's current council policy.
Point of order, can't the minutes just record?
Yeah.
And I'm asking your advice. You may not know the answer to this, but...
Well, no, my ruling is no, because then it opens up a very wide precedent for... We can all do it for anything, we can all do it for everything, yeah.
Madam Chair, I also don't think that it's possible for this committee to even have an amendment to that, because that is a council decision.
Yes.
Even though I totally agree with Councillor Gallagher.
Good point, Councillor
It's a council decision. This is a committee of council. The council would have to receive the proper notice for varying a previous decision.
Yes, that's right. And actually, you raised a good point in that Councillor Gallagher has spoken to the motion, and once you've spoken to a motion, you can't raise an amendment. So sorry, Councillor Gallagher.
So I appreciate your ruling.
Thank you. We're putting this to the vote, Councillor Mallett?
I just want to make sure the wording's right. So can I just be correct? Could someone confirm, what does 5.1 say now?
So all HCC appointments to boards of CEOs are at the CCO subcommittee pleasure at the pleasure of the CCO subcommittee.
So 5.1 says, as per its delegated authority, so.
4.6.
4.6
4.6, sorry.
has replaced HCC with CCO subcommittee.
So just the two times that HCC is in 4.6 are replaced now with CCO.
No, only the second one. The first one is
So there's still HCC appointments.
yes,
At
To
the
the board.
CCO's pleasure.
yes. CCO subcommittee.
CCO subcommittees.
Right, that's been moved and seconded.
And just the other change was item 4.4, the removal of the TO, the additional 2.
Yes, we have
That was a material
Thank
one.
you.
That was the one.
significant one.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Keep it up, Councillor Tooman, please. Yep. And against, please raise your hands. Right, that's been carried. Thank you. Right, we're moving on to item 12, page 39. This is a report signalling a review of the zoo management plan, and there is a bit of a process here that the staff wish us to take, which is to develop a working group. So take the report as read. I haven't, just on the working group, I would certainly like to be on that working group, and I have had some interest from Councillor Young and Councillor Pascoe. But are there any questions on the report? Hi, Stephen. Welcome. If there are no questions,
So so the three elected, the suggestion is on point 24 that it be at least 3 elected councillors.
so I'm going to get to a motion that will help. But if there are no questions, I'll get straight to the motion. So, Councillor Gallagher?
Look, I declare a sort of interest, believe it or not, I was on the zoo board back in 1996, 97.
yes.
And also I'm sitting on the Lake Rotakauri group, and there's some related issues, you know. Is there a capacity for members of the council who are not on the working group to sit in particular on some of the presentations, or not?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's all right, because I respect you need new blood, and this is the names that you've suggested are good because they'll bring some fresh eyes.
And I also just wanted to make sure that we understand that the mayor is ex officio on all working groups as well as everything else. So, all right, so absolutely, Councillor Gallagher. So with that, on page 39, I'm going to move A. I'm not going to move B because I don't think we need to discuss or endorse a process. That's not really how normal working groups work. We decide on the first day. So A and C becomes B. The Strategy and Policy Committee nominate Councillors O'Leary, Young and Pascoe.
I'll second that.
And then the rest, representation on a working group, etc. So that's being moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Gallagher. Any discussion? Councillor Mallett?
Just very quickly, is there a timeline when you'd want to get some report back by? Sorry, I can't see it here. Maybe it's
There is in the. I haven't bought. I'm sorry, I haven't. I'm usually more organised. It's in the Strategy and Policy Work Programme.
I have a quick question.
June next year.
It's the 19th of November, it's supposed to come back to this committee.
November.
Yes, according to paragraph 22 on page 40.
Oh.
27.
Madam Chair,
Sorry, hang on, I just want to... Okay, so, well, Stephen, you've written this report, so you think you can hit 19th of November?
Yes, Madam Chair. The idea is that it can have some impact on the LTP process.
Okay, fantastic, all right.
Can I just...
you have a question?
Sorry, that needs to be 19 November 2004.
Yes. And Councillor Wilson, did you have a question?
Yeah, very quickly. The staff, page 39, I'm just wondering about the budget, $80,000. Why do we need $80,000 to do this review?
So we've got specialist zoo designers to work with the working group, and also to develop the master plan at the end of that. So there are very, as you can imagine, there are very, very few specialist zoo designers in the world. And there are, the ones we've been working with have worked in this region for over 20 years. They've worked with zoos such as Auckland Zoo and Melbourne Zoo to develop master plans around that.
So a subsequent question, so an earlier working group has already deemed that we need to redesign the zoo. One would have assumed that the product of the working group may have led to that conclusion, but we seem to have already determined that we need to allocate a budget of 80,000 and we need a team of expert designers. I didn't realise the working group had already made that decision.
The work, through the chair, the work plan did state it was the development of a zoo master plan. So the strategic review is a mechanism to get to that goal.
Okay.
Thank you.
The animals have to live somewhere.
Right. Look, it's been moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Gallagher. Is there any debate? No? All those in favour? Any against? No, that's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Item 13, page 50. Community Assistance Funding Review. This review has been previously signed off on the work programme. We're going to take, hi Lance and Dee, we're going to take the report as read. Now, I have had interest from Councillor Gallagher and Young, who want to be on that working group, and also from Councillors Forsyth, Haskell and Mallet as Chair and Deputy Chair of Finance. So just letting everyone know in advance. Any questions?
Yes.
Councillor Young.
I just want to ask, why not an external or stakeholder is appropriate to be appointed to the working group?
If I may, through the chair, we actually hadn't thought of that. That's why it's not.
Like, for example, the committee of the small grant allocation committee or the chair, or would that be considered as appropriate?
My view was that staff and councillors should work through, there's a couple of parts of there's the process part around what's the most efficient way of being able to hand out the grants. And I think some councillors wanted to know is what we're doing at the moment the most efficient way, so that's one part of it. The other part is actually the discussion around the criteria and the actual policies itself, which would then feed into the LTP process. I felt that was pretty prudent for councillors and staff to work through that and then decide on which parts of the policy that we might want to review. And as we said in the consultation section in number 21 of the item, that then obviously there would be a discussion with other parties when we started going down the line of looking at the policies themselves and get feedback from a wide range of groups. So rather than limiting yourself to one person, I felt that consultation would get that feedback from the affected parties and other stakeholders. But if council's got other views on what might be useful, then we're open to that, Madam Chair.
I think this review is primarily, to start with, it's a strategic policy, it's a policy discussion, isn't it? Which should sit with elected members.
Yeah, and maybe it may not be as clear as it should be in the report. Just my recollection of the discussions at the annual plan meetings, I think some of the things that came up were the eligibility criteria for different groups to apply for the monies. I think that was one matter that councillors wanted us to have a re-look at. And there was one, and I think then the size of the grants and these three different sections of the grants is the quantum of monies as well was another area. They're just two. Obviously, the policy has a whole bunch of other aspects to it, but they were two that I can recommend.
Right. Any further questions? Right, so Councillor Young or Councillor Gallagher, would you like to move and second?
Yeah, what I'm going to just ask first, just to get us some feel around the table, I'm happy to move it, is that you've got 5 elected members expressing an interest, and my brain says, for the sake of an extra 2 people in the room, the 5, if you look at it, one, I think it's quite legit. Of course, the finance, you have a range of a range of expertises and a range of, I suspect, approaches as well. So I think that 5, while it's slightly larger than normal, will give us a sort of a healthy cross-section of views and strategic looking forward. I do agree, however, I can say, and I'm not sure, I think I hear what you say, I'm very keen that certainly the chair of our Small Grant Community Assistance Committee is consulted and is involved in some way, because I think she will give you the working group some really good reflections on how it's working in practice. And I note that she's also coming to the community forum to give a sort of an outturn report on the, on not the grants per se, but the process. So on the basis that we would actually involve her as the chair of that group in an appropriate way, then I'd be happy to move that A, B, C and D, and that instead of 3 elected members, and that this is just testing the waters, I realise I'm one of them, and that Councillor Forsyth, Pascoe, Mallet, Young and Gallagher, so it's, and the elected members be, so it's 5 elected members. I know it's slightly large, but I do think out of this work we will probably get a good cross-section of viewpoints, really.
And Councillor Gallagher, I wonder if you would entertain Councillor Young chairing that?
Yes.
As your deputy?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Good idea.
And
So,
so,
and
can I
Councillor-
just also raise, is it supposed to, D is supposed to mean this committee, isn't it?
Yeah, to S&P.
To this committee.
Yeah. So with the changes of wording, I'm happy to so move.
And Councillor Young, you're happy to second that?
Yep.
Right. Is there any debate? No? All those in favour?
Aye.
Any against? That's carried.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair, we'll find some dates that suit the elected members.
Right.
And go from there.
Yep. Thank you. What's that?
Remuneration?
No. Talk to
covered in your
talk to the
policy.
chair of the CCO subcommittee,
funding.
Councillor Mallett. Right, we're on the last item, item 14, page 53.
Good try, Gary, good try.
And this report is an overview again of a process for the new cycleway plan, which has been signed off in the annual plan. This is a 30-year vision. Even though I don't ride bikes, I'm particularly excited about this one. So, take the report as read. Hi, Phil, standing in for Chris Allen. And this also requests elected members and external members be on there. I think external members, it's best practice for the working group to decide, I guess, who those are. And I've had interest from councillors Forsyth only. And I'd like to nominate her as chair of the working group.
Yes.
Councillor Gallagher?
Madam Chair, as you know, I'm a very keen cyclist.
You are.
And you know that I regularly do that. But I know Councillor McPherson because
Yes.
of a very
did
strong
look at him.
historical policy stuff over many years, and also his work on the Churchill Fellowship in the UK.
Yes.
I'd actually, under the chairmanship of Councillor Forsyth, be quite keen to be on it. But that's so those are 2 expressions of interest, and I'd certainly
Councillor McPherson.
want personally Councillor Forsyth to chair it.
And sorry, and yourself, Councillor Gallagher.
I'd like to go on
Yeah.
it with Councillor
Great,
McPherson. if we could.
okay. So you'd be happy to move that then?
I think we need more people to be,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but I think that this is actually quite a substantial
It
piece
is.
of work.
Mm.
And I think it will require a few more people, can I suggest, because,
Yeah.
you know, there's quite a lot of discussion needed here, and it's a mixture of the transport unit, but also the parks and open spaces people. There's also the impact on the river plan, because there's
Yeah.
substantial impact on that. So I think actually it needs a critical mass, can I suggest?
So, okay, so is there anyone else that would like to be? Leo, Councillor Tooman.
I'm keen to go on it because
Yeah.
we can make those connections with the river plan and everything, so I'm happy to put my name down.
Okay.
Look, I wondered if, I haven't had an opportunity to approach Councillor Green, but she does have a young family and children, and I think having that kind of perspective and that input into a plan like this would be really helpful, but yes, I haven't spoken to her yet.
We can pop her in there.
Just as a query, a process around the external stakeholders,
Yeah.
and I think now you've got quite a broad range of elected members, that's fine. is everyone comfortable that those elected members, if you like, on advice, then finalise the external stakeholders, or do you perceive that coming back?
I'm very comfortable. I'm very
Okay.
comfortable with
Okay.
that. And, yeah. Okay, so, councillor Forsyth, do you want to move that?
Oh, yes, happy to do that. Look, we don't, I haven't got my glasses on, but we don't have any sort of time frames here, or do you have anything on your plan which would suggest that we have an end point or some sort of target to report
June
back?
next year. It's June next year, the plan's got to hit, so it's got to be in time for the LTP as well, so. All right, so if there is no further questions, councillor Forsyth has moved that, seconded by councillor Gallagher. Any debate?
Chair, can I just check, was councillor Tooman on this or not? I picked up Hardacre Green, Gallagher, versus Forsyth.
If he wants to be.
I didn't hear
So
it.
we've got councillor Forsyth as chair, councillor McPherson, councillor Gallagher, Her Worship the Mayor, councillor Green, and councillor Tooman. That's a good team you've got there, Margaret. Fantastic. All right. So if there's no debate on that, all those in favour? Against? It's carried and the meeting is closed.